Yeah, hello everyone. This is Patricia and Rainer again. And we met only last week because I was supposed to give the talk on psychosomatic energetics for the Positive Living Group in Southampton with Jackie White. And that couldn't happen because we are all locked up at home and can't see the people we wanted to. So Patricia and I met online, and we discovered that we are on the same road to health for everybody. And today Patricia would like to tell us about the bioelectric body, which I find really interesting, because I think everything that exists is made of light, which is electromagnetic energy and information. And I would like to ask Patricia just to introduce herself a little bit, because she can do that much better than I would do. Patricia, if you could go full screen. Yes, thank you.
Done that. We're getting the hang of this, Rainer. Finally. Hello, everyone. Hello to all the members of the Southampton Positive Living Group, and to anyone else who's tuning in through my or Rainer's contacts, because I know we're going to pick up gradually a lot more people. So my talk today is on the bioelectric body, and it's actually very relevant, I think, to the times we're in, to understand that we are more than just the physical. And there will also be some talk about COVID-19 as well after the presentation, so stay tuned, people. Right, so I am a PhD doctor. I'm not a medical doctor, so don't ask me about how to cure certain conditions. I won't be able to tell you, but I will be able to tell you a lot about biochemistry, pharmacology and nutritional medicine, because that's my big area. I actually was a university health researcher for a number of years. I also worked in the NHS for a long time as well, and recently completed my PhD in the traumatic components of chronic pain, because so much chronic pain actually comes from distorted emotions that are stored in the body, being read as pain by the brain. I now concentrate on using somatic trauma healing methods. In other words, I use the body in order to unblock these elements of memory and information flow that have got stuck. So anyone can contact me. I'll give you my details again at the end, but alchemytherapies.co.uk. Okay, without further ado, just a brief outline then. We're going to look at the materialist versus the energetic understanding of life. We're going to look at the cell and genetics without getting too deep, but just to introduce why it's important energetically. We're going to look at the fascinating area of water in living systems, which differs significantly from the water that you will have learned all about externally. I then just briefly touch on food as information rather than just as calories, because it's really important to understand, particularly at this time, we need the right information in our bodies. In the second half, I'm going to be looking at brainwaves and sleep, which are again vital for health and immunity. And I'm going to look at the heart and the brain in terms of what you can do to change this information flow. So what I've termed biofield engineering. In other words, how to effect change in this information flow. Okay, and then we're going to have a little break at the end of my presentation for questions and a cup of tea and what they call a comfort break, I should imagine. And after that, we're going to do our COVID-19 Q&A discussion, Rainer and I. So, okay, let's begin. Okay, well, the first thing to understand is that most of us were taught as children that we grow up in a material world and we inhabit a material body. We are a solid thing that interacts with other solid things. And what the quantum world understanding, quantum theory teaches us, And it's an understanding developed through physicists who've been studying very tiny elements of life, that we are not actually material or solid. We are not independent of others. We actually exist not just as molecules in a body. We exist, in fact, in an energetic form, which is a wave function. So the sad thing is that this has been completely missed from medicine and science as you've been taught it. It seems only physicists seem to know this stuff, and they tend to apply it to the cosmos, to large scale things, or very, very small things that don't really impact us on a daily basis, although they are coming into medicine. But your average GP and your average person, when they go and see their GP, will have no understanding of this whatsoever. And that's a real shame, because it really limits our ability to transform ourselves and live our most vital life. So it turns out that material things only appear material. They're actually composed of very tiny probability wave functions. So without getting too deep into quantum physics here, things are not solid. They are a probability of appearing solid. And it seems they interact with us, the observer and consciousness, to become solid. So if I touch my shoulder here, it feels solid, but actually it's the energy of my fingers contacting the energy of my material solid-ish tissues, and the energy repelling each other that makes it feel solid. If you go down to the smallest function, the smallest scales, you'll find that light or electromagnetic radiation lies at the heart of everything that we are and everything that we perceive. And these are called quanta, and quanta of light are photons. So you can't see them, you can't feel them other than through some forms of perception, perhaps. And our brains, it could be said, are downloading the information flow from light. So a quantum understanding is really strange. It's actually been termed spooky by Einstein. Over 100 years ago, he called it spooky action at a distance, because it says that everything is connected to everything else, and that light interpenetrates everything and affects change in everything, even to the point where thoughts can change your energy, as you probably already know. So a quantum understanding opens up these new channels of healing that are not reliant on firing new chemicals into the body and saying, well, we're going to change this pathway, which is what pharmacology is based on. It's a materialist understanding, and it's extremely limited. And the problem is, as you already know, you get lots of side effects with pharmaceuticals, because it's a very blunt instrument that changes one thing, and the body doesn't work that way. The body is an interconnected web. So we have to work at the level that the body works at, rather than trying to work at a distant level of changing certain systems. And the great news is, once we do that, change, healing and health become much quicker to achieve and longer lasting, because what we're doing is working at the level of the problem rather than 7 steps away from the level of the problem. So it's what I call root cause medicine. So just a little bit more on biophotons then. What are they? Where are they? And how do we know about them? Well, this is a picture here of DNA, sort of as a light wave function. You can see the typical helix, the double helix. And biophotons actually exist everywhere in the body. They are these tiny packets of light emitted by the body, but especially the fingers and the brain. Fingers is interesting because obviously we tend to touch other people with our hands, and not at the moment, obviously, but normally we do. And this actually communicates light energy to others as well. Now, DNA, which you all have come across. It's deoxyribonucleic acid. It's the genetic code. It consists of this double helix with a certain number of sort of bases that acts like the rungs of a ladder, and they're the code. A, T, C, and G is the genetic code. And we've all been taught that genetic code is fixed. You're born with it. You get half from your mum, half from your dad, and it's Russian roulette as to what you end up with. And your health and healing is dependent on if you get a good set of genes or a bad set of genes. And actually, the truth is very far from that. That's only your predisposition. What you then do with it, how you live, how you think, how you eat, how you interact with the world changes this light energy of DNA, and thus changes the way it is read. So DNA is not a fixed entity. It is always responding to its environment. And that isn't just the outside environment, that's the you environment, the body you inhabit. And it does that in order to coordinate cellular function, because cells are at the heart of your body. And we'll come on to this later, but it actually acts as an antenna, not just as a fixed lump of material. Okay, so interestingly, an organism under stress, and I know Rainer covered this a lot in the previous session, emits more incoherent light. So when we talk about coherence, what we mean is that the waves move in synchrony. That's the only way I can describe it. And when waves move in synchrony, they enhance each other, and the waves get larger and more powerful and more information rich as well. So if you are under stress, your light becomes disordered, incoherent. The waves do not emit at the same time. They're at different frequencies, and you get a more incoherent emission. And what we have found, what science is beginning to find, is that disordered tissues, for instance, in a cancerous tissue or in a body that has suffered some form of trauma, the incoherence is much greater. So stress changes the information pattern of the human body. So just looking a little more detail at DNA, and here's a typical picture of a cell, and I like this one because it sort of shows you that the DNA is wrapped, it's coiled in little structures around in the cell nucleus. But it's not just, as I said, a fixed genetic code, it's an antennae that picks up signals from your environment, which gives it the information it needs to enable replication. And without replication, you cannot grow, you cannot develop, and you certainly cannot pass on your genes and reproduce. So what we've recently found, and this is information from the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years, is that DNA vibrates. It vibrates at specific frequencies in waveforms that have been termed conformons. And it's the vibration of DNA that sort of unlocks it. It's always been a bit of a mystery how to coordinate the unlocking of the DNA in order to be read into proteins. And light is at the heart of this unlocking. So light photons interact with the emissions given by the DNA, and it coordinates it all like a cellular dance in order to read specific areas and ignore other areas, because you don't want to read the whole length of DNA. It's thousands and thousands of bases. You basically only want to read the specific bit that says either, heal this bit, create this protein. You need a coordinating wave in order to read the correct parts in the correct order. The other thing that's interesting about these light biophotons is that they store memory as well. So not only do you have a coordinating function, but you have a memory function, which means everything that has gone before in you or in other people is sort of globally stored. And so this is probably how we are evolving as a species, and why things have gone a bit wrong recently, I think, is that we have been in fear and disconnection from our world. We'll come on to that later. But memory is a really important function. It's a quantum function. So our thoughts and emotions actually change this interaction, this quantum interaction with DNA. And different emotions have different vibrations. So love, gratitude, and compassion actually enhance the coherence of your body, and in particular your DNA, thus improving your DNA's response to what's going on to its environment and enhancing your immunity. Hate, anger, and fear is the big one right now. A lot of people are in a tremendous amount of fear about their livelihoods, about their loved ones. Fear and these negative emotions actually are incoherent, they're disordered, and they shut down your immunity because the body feels it's under life threat. And therefore, an immune system isn't needed. You just need to basically keep yourself functioning at a really basic level. So we need to harness our positive thoughts and emotions at this time, rather than being dragged along by a media that feeds off fear. Emotions, by the way, communicate non-locally. Now, that's a term used by quantum physics that means it happens outside of space and time. Space and time are the materialist viewpoint, that I have a lifespan, that things happen yesterday, today, and tomorrow. That's time. And that space is a reality. But in quantum world, actually, space and time are a sort of this interconnected wave of probability again. And something that happens at one point in space-time is instantaneously communicated to something else that it is linked with. So I know these understandings are a bit strange if you've never come to quantum physics, but they are proven, certainly at the level of the very small and the very large. What's missing is we haven't really considered it in the nature of the human body up until now. This understanding is so new, it's not in your textbooks yet. If any of you or your children or grandchildren are studying biology or genetics, some of this isn't there yet, but it is in the papers. It just takes about 15 years to translate through to, you know, I guess, public health and also teaching. If you're interested in that, the Institute of Heart Math it's an American institute, have a lot of great stuff on their website about this, and we'll be talking a bit more about that when we look at the heart in a minute. So drilling down even more, let's look at a cell. Here's a typical cell surrounded by a membrane. Now, membranes are not just a passive bag of fluid. They're not just something like a balloon. Membranes are actually composed of a double layer. They're very complex structures, and they have a double layer of proteins and fats. And the protein here is shown by the blue blob, and the fatty chains are the sort of reddy tails. It's called a phospholipid bimembrane because it's got two arms, if you like, that fit together. And traversing this double layer is a series of proteins that allow the passage of molecules in and out. And that's what we understood from the materialist perspective. It was a sort of like a pore in a membrane would allow things in and out. But we now know it's much more complex than that. On the surface, you'll see there are some receptors. These are a form of protein that translate information from the outside to the inside. We used to think of it like a lock and a key. So the key would come in and fit in the lock, and then that would trigger the opening of the lock inside the cell. And it is a means of transmitting information between the outside and the inside. But they're not just these chemical docking stations. This key and lock mechanism is far more complex because we've missed out the whole electromagnetic nature of the cell and the body. These protein receptors are actually electromagnetic signalers immersed in this biofield of wave function and light. This is the term given to the whole enormous plasma structure that we are immersed in, and we are connected with everyone and everything else, from the smallest to the largest, element of the universe, and that's the biofield. So we really are magnificent. Human beings are magnificent and powerful. We've just lost that right now. We're feeling very small and insignificant. The cell actually isn't just a round ball. It actually has antennae that stick out. They're called primary cilia, like hairs that move on the outside of the cell, absolutely like moving antennae. And they pick up these electromagnetic signals of light from the outside as well and transmit them in. So in actual fact, this is a better picture. And again, this information has only been recently discovered because we've only recently been able to get the pictures of living cells, of living, respiring, communicating cells. We always used to have to kill something in order to view it, you know, and then isolate it from its cellular environment. Now we can see things in real time, in actually moving and living, and we've noticed that there are these hairs or cilia that move on the outside of the cell. So it really is an incredible structure, and we're only beginning to understand how this works. So the other thing to note is that the cell has a communication network. So we've talked about the membrane and how that communicates the information from the outside to the inside. How does it then transmit the information throughout the cell? Well, it has this highway, it has this communication highway, which is called the microtubule network. And they've stained, this is an animal cell staining or micrograph, showing this incredible network, which is very much like, I guess, the roads in a city, or you could liken it to, I guess, paths through a forest or something like that. It's about transmitting information. Microtubules are in fact not just communication structures, they also help to sort of support the cell. So they're the scaffolding as well. If you imagine a structure without scaffolding, it would just collapse, and that's what would happen to the cell. So it's a structural and informational molecule, and they actually allow cell division and replication, which is their primary function. But they're also quantum structures that exist in one of two states. Now, again, this is quantum physics, so without going into too much detail, we've talked that a quantum understanding of the world is about energy, and in energy terms, a thing can be either on or off. It can be in one of two states. This is the nature of a liquid crystal, and you know that liquid crystals are used in computing. So it's very true to say that this cell, and particularly this cell structure, the microtubule, acts as a liquid crystal matrix. So it's incredibly complex. Microtubules also have amazing capacity to conduct light. They are what's called superconductors. So we know that light is at the heart of the cell, coordinating this information flow. And coherence between the network of different microtubules is what communicates health or not. As I've said, when wave functions are in synchrony, you have a coherent output. So it's not just through the cell itself, it's between cells as well, because there are other structures that communicate between cells, which I haven't got time to go into. So light is at the heart of this information flow. And actually the body uses very specific wavelengths of light, in particular infrared. It also uses other wavelengths, but infrared is one of the main ones in the body. And it's especially important for healing. And we use it sometimes in therapeutically, because it helps to guide migration for cell division. And as I've said, if you can't divide and if you can't reproduce your cells, you're not growing, you're not living. There's a picture here of how the microtubules actually allow the cells to be split apart. It's sort of like they're the guide wires to separate one cell into two, which is how reproduction really occurs, how cell division occurs. So microtubules, really important. informational structures. Okay, next thing I want to come on to is water in the cell, because we all grew up thinking water is 2 hydrogens and an oxygen, it's H2O. But in living structures, it's actually a different combination. It's actually H3O2. And it's often called gel phase or structured water. So it sort of locks together, these molecules lock together in another liquid crystal formation. Sometimes also called EZ water. Gerald Pollack in the US coined it that when he discovered it. It's his research. Being American, it's EZ, not EZ as we say in the UK. But it's a nice way of putting it, because it stands for the exclusion zone, and I'll come on to that. But just to notice that water is structured in biological systems as a liquid crystal. So it's different. It's not H2O, H3O2. And these liquid crystal matrices have very particular properties, as you'd imagine. When this structured water forms in living systems, it actually separates out into charged bands, with the negative charged bands being closest to the edge of the structure, whether that be a membrane or a capillary, to form these zones, which he's called the exclusion zone, which is the negative charged bit, and then there's the positive charged bit with the protons to the other side of that. And you might imagine where you're separating charges, it's like a battery, isn't it? Well, that's exactly right. So separation of charges means you drive energy, you drive movement. So let's look at a biological system like a capillary, which is the smallest part of your blood system, where you're actually transferring oxygen and carbon dioxide from the outside to the inside. Capillaries are really interesting structures, obviously cylindrical, but the membrane on the inner surface is hydrophilic, in other words, water loving, and it attracts this exclusion zone of negative charges, with the interior being positive. So it forms these 2 layers, charge separated, and that acts as a battery to actually power cellular functions, in particular the membranes of mitochondria in your cells. And again, I'm not going to go into detail about that today, but they are the energy factories of your cell. So energy production is really dependent on this nature of biological water. It is an informational structure, and it is the charge separation. In fact, we've just discovered this. This is hot off the press. This is about 2 or 3 years old, this information, that drives blood flow along the capillaries to ease pressure on the heart. We used to think of the heart as just a simple pump, but in actual fact, physicists have long wondered how on earth the heart has enough power. They've calculated to push blood through the tiny, tiny circumference of a capillary would take a heart that was 1,000 times stronger than it actually is. And that was a conundrum that no one could answer until now. And in fact, what we now know is that the heart is pumping, of course, but it's actually being pulled more by this charge separation along the capillaries than it is being pushed. So the heart is definitely part of it, but it's by no means the total sum of why blood flows along. And if you look at, this is a sort of section through a capillary, and this is the work of Stephanie Seneff, who's a researcher at MIT in the US. Very, very profoundly exciting researcher. She's come up with a lot of new information. And she's showing us that it is this charge separation along the capillary that is pulling the blood cells along, which allows the heart to be able to just provide a gentle push rather than having to force it. It also is involved with how nitrogen or nitric oxide is involved as well in that, with opening or closing down the capillaries. So really huge implications for heart disease here, by the way, people. That if you're not getting enough light in your life, whether that be externally or internally, you're likely to have problems with heart function. And finally, in this section, food. We've been told a lot about food recently. We're always being told what we can eat and what we can't, and what provides good fats and bad fats, and good cholesterol and bad cholesterol. Food is not just a solid material thing. It is an informational, vibrating medium. Food is information. And I've just here got a slide with a few of the structures of common foods. And you'll notice they're all quite complex molecules. I don't know, most people who haven't studied chemistry wouldn't necessarily know what this means, but anything with a ring in it or a double line, that's a double bond, and a ring structure also has a lot of double bonds, and double bonds between atoms vibrate much, much more. So these are very powerful informational molecules. Things with high double bonds vibrate more. They're actually called chromophores, and suggesting, in fact, that we can actually transform our information in our bodies through what we eat. And one of the most common is resveratrol, which comes from grapes and red wine. But there are many, many others, which I haven't got time to go into. Now, also ATP, which is your energy molecule that is formed from food, it's involved in the energy cycle in your cell, also vibrates. It's also an antenna relaying information from the biofield. And here's the structure of ATP. And you'll see again, ring structures, double bonds, all vibrating. And of course, because we've tended to always think of things as written down in 2D, we don't see that. We think of them as solid structures, but they're not. They actually have an oscillation. So the body is informational. So far I've just looked at this materialist versus energetic understanding of life. We've covered a little bit about the cell and genetics. I've looked at water in living systems and food as information. In the next section, I want to dive a little deeper into the brain, the heart, and how we can change everything through biofield engineering. So, and finally, at the end, we'll have 15 minutes for Q&A. So the bioelectric brain then, if the body is not material, then the brain, which is part of the body, is also not material. It is an informational vibrating structure. Now, we might be more aware of the brain than we are anything else as an electric structure, because we can measure the brain waves. We can actually see on an EEG different brain waves corresponding to different states of being. So they actually correlate, and I know Rainer looked at this last week as well, with different awarenesses, different alert states. So most of us are, to be honest, we're in beta most of the time, particularly at the moment, because we're very busy trying to solve our problems and work out what we're going to be doing in the next few weeks and months. And we can go through to other states through meditation or relaxation. And we do it naturally, of course, when we're approaching sleep as well. So through to alpha and theta and delta. And what you'll see, the difference is actually the frequency of the wave. So gamma and beta are a very high frequency. And as we slow it down, the brain begins to go into a different state of being. But we can change that ourselves. We can actually intervene and take our brain out of busy beta and take it into a more alpha or theta state through what's called entrainment. And that's where you intervene in some way with another wave. So you project another wave, whether it's sound or light, at the human, and our brains uniquely are able to interact with light waves through other humans and also animals and the world around us. So we can entrain, that means bring back into coherence these light waves and change our state of being. And there are many ways to do that, and I won't have time to cover them all. One of the best I've come across, I don't know if you have, Rainer, is binaural beats, or
yes,
two sounds in the ears. One is a different frequency, very slightly different frequency from the other, creates a virtual standing wave in the brain and actually entrains it to a new relaxed state. Fascinating. I've used it a lot. It's really brilliant technology. Just a little bit on sleep then. So these natural brainwave states during sleep we go through a series of cycles from different stages in order to actually promote brain regeneration, information flow while we sleep. And there are these distinct stages which again can be measured. When we're awake, as I say, most of us are in a busy state. As we begin to go into sleep, drowsiness, things start to slow down. There are also specific brain waves during sleep that are not seen during awake alertness. So a non-REM theta is or slow wave sleep, it's called as well, actually has these little spindles. In other words, bits of high activity, and then it's fairly low key, and then another spindle will occur. And they're called sleep spindles or K complexes. So we see very specific patterns during sleep, which makes us wonder why they're important. And we now have some answers to that, I think. As we move beyond that, we're going into a deeper stage of sleep, a REM sleep or dream sleep state. There are also a stage in between that's called non-REM delta. So, and what happens in terms of our sleep cycle is we repeat these stages 3 to 5 times during the night. And that actually is to do with our sleep quality. So you can have 8 hours of sleep a night and still feel unrested in the morning because you've not gone through the required number of stages in the right order. So the purpose of sleep, we now think, is about processing memory and emotion. Emotion, by the way, is an energy just as much as everything else. And it allows the body to heal and repair without the excess energy required for the brain to be fully alert. The thinking brain is actually shut down. What's interesting is the lymphatics actually drain as well. So you clear toxins from the brain, and you actually have time to process stuff that's been going on in your life. So it's really interesting. And these cycles, as I said, repeat 3 to 5 times over the night. And we think that the way they do this is involved with the maintenance of the brain. So how rested you feel in the morning depends on how many cycles and the quality that you've had. Children, interestingly, have much more dream sleep than adults and more sleep overall, as you know. So the implication there is that sleep is really, really important in brain development, which I believe is correct. But it's also important for adults in keeping ourselves functional. And I think when things go wrong in this information flow, this is where we get, particularly, I believe, Alzheimer's, cognitive difficulties. So it's not just the brain waves. The brain waves are the information flow. The hormonal system also picks up on that and changes all sorts of things with regard to your body temperature, your level of melatonin, which sort of ties in to your sleep cycle, and your plasma cortisol. And cortisol is a really, really important hormone. It's part of the stress response system. It controls your blood sugar. And what's meant to happen is it goes down over the day, particularly in the afternoon. That's why we get that sugar craving, usually mid-afternoon. And then as we sleep, cortisol is raised in order to keep blood flow going through the organs while we are inactive. And it should peak just as we're waking up in order to get us motivated and moving. And that's sort of tied in with melatonin. They work in sort of synchrony. It's a synchronous wave function, which can go horribly wrong when you're stressed, when you're eating rubbish food, when your relationships are not going well, when you're not getting outside enough and getting enough light. So we know that melatonin, which is the main hormone of sleep, it's the circadian rhythm hormone, is secreted during the night, and it's particularly secreted during this slow wave sleep that I showed you earlier. So these two things, your brain waves and your hormones, are talking to each other, and it's through the wave function, it's through the information flow. Unfortunately, well, or fortunately for us, but sometimes when it goes wrong, not so fortunately, melatonin actually suppresses insulin. So we don't want lots of, you need lots of blood sugar during the night because you've got to function, even though, as I've said, you're not active. So you need to suppress insulin, which takes sugar out of the blood. So this whole thing allows us to detoxify while we're asleep, and while we're essentially fasting, because we're not eating when we're asleep, hopefully. In fact, you should have a wide break between your last evening meal and your first breakfast, and that allows us to actually detoxify properly. So there's huge ramifications if our sleep goes wrong, and it was one of the first things that went wrong for me when I got ill. I haven't told about that, but I had chronic fatigue syndrome when I was 34. And the first sign for me was poor sleep. I just couldn't sleep properly. It started with waking early, and then I couldn't get sleep at all. And then I went through a long period where everything was completely dysregulated. I had no idea what was causing it, but I have a lot more insight now. Okay, so it's actually synchronized, this whole process, by oscillating proteins, interestingly, in our retina as well. So the back of our eye, when obviously we've got our eyes closed, not so much light penetrating. When we open them, that light stimulates the back of the retina, a series of proteins called cryptochromes, and these are oscillating proteins which read the amount of light and tell us, whether we're asleep or awake. So again, really new information, only been discovered in the last 4 or 5 years. And then I wanted to touch on the pineal gland, because it's such an important master gland, maybe the origin of the third eye, which, Eastern medicine knows a lot about, the chakra system and so on. But here it is in scientific detail. This is where it is in the body. Notice it is at the base of the brain, just beneath the channel between the left and the right hemisphere. So it's almost like a light tunnel, and at the bottom is the pineal gland. That's no accident. The body never does anything by accident. It actually reads light. It's formed at birth. It develops until puberty, so it grows, but then it starts to calcify around age 7. And in fact, you can decalcify your pineal gland, and there are protocols out there. I've looked on YouTube. It's not great that it overcalcifies, but there must be a biological reason that it becomes less light sensitive around about the age of 7. And this could explain why children are much more aware of their environment and much more imaginative and just in a different sort of state than most adults. We think it's an electromagnetic organ synchronized, in fact, to the Earth's magnetic field. There is a vibration of the Earth as well. It's called the Schumann resonance. And we think that could operate via the magnetite, which is a form of magnetic crystal that it actually has inside it. So pineal gland is a fascinating organ, and it produces melatonin. So it's intimately linked with your sleep cycle. It also secretes something called pinealine, which is a chemical that enhances DNA replication. So it's important for your growth and development. And a chemical called DMT, which is the one that I believe some people have more of, which gives them a telepathic ability. They can feel things, they can communicate with other entities, whether that be other human beings or beyond that. So children have this, of course. They're much more communicative with animals and creatures, and they have a fantasy life. So DMT seems to be very profoundly involved in that. So there's lots of different functions, but overall, we think the pineal gland is this brain coordinating center. So it's pumping out these signals, whether electromagnetic or chemical, that coordinate the entire brain. So it really is a very important structure. And we could say it's the origin of the third eye, because it's how you perceive things that are beyond your sensory perception. So we think responsible for childhood imagination and Schumann resonance, which is a really interesting factor. And I know Reiner's going to maybe ask me about that or tell me something, because he's nodding away.
There's so much we could talk about.
There is so much there. All right, so nearly towards the end, just a little bit on the heart, because a lot of people don't realize the heart is an electromagnetic organ as well. We tend to think of it as just this pump, just doing its thing. And here you can see the normal, the wave of the heartbeat. But notice that it's not regular. It's not like a metronome. And in fact, if it is a metronome, you are very sick. In fact, it should vary. When we breathe in, it should speed up. And when we breathe out, it should slow down. And it should do that in coordination with your nervous system. In fact, it's a really important measure of how healthy you are. So this interbeat variation, if we plot that, is like the line above. It's this lovely sine wave, and it should be regular and smooth variation. And I've said it speeds up because the sympathetic nervous system, which controls inhalation, speeds it up. And when we breathe out, our parasympathetic nerves come into play and they slow it down. And so it's actually how our nervous system, aka our brain and nerves, are talking to our heart. So it's about this heart-brain coherence. And it's a really easy one to measure. You don't have to go to your doctor to do this. In fact, your doctor wouldn't probably know anything about it, unfortunately. But you can actually measure it yourself using various devices. And there are even some free apps you can load onto your phone and measure it for yourself. A high variability is good. It's one of the major indicators of health, this responsiveness to your heart and brain coherence, all about waves again. And so my final part here is how to engineer our biofield interaction. And there are various methods we can do that. And obviously I haven't got time to go into every single one, because there's plenty of people out there who do different things, I'm sure. Homeopathy I haven't included, but that's clearly an engineering through the biofield. Touch is a really important one. Now, right now, we're all being a bit limited with how much we can touch others. But it's really important because it's a piezoelectric effect. It's when we touch someone, we actually induce a charge separation in them. And things like massage, tapping or EFT, acupuncture certainly probably work that way. There are ones that use vision or sight. I use one called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which is a bit of a mouthful. So we call it EMDR for short. And that involves actually moving something across a person's field of vision. I use fingers, some people use lights. You can even do it with sound, but it's more effective actually if you get someone to track with their eyes, not their head. They keep their head still across the field of vision, and you watch the eyes as a source of memory processing, because it's mimicking what happens during REM sleep, during dream sleep. So it's a brilliant, brilliant tool, one of the best I've ever discovered for resolving trauma. And HRV, as I've said, measuring your heart rate variability through biofeedback. So if you've got the app on your phone and you can measure your blood flow in your finger, and you just put it on the camera and you're measuring and you're looking at a screen and you're seeing this sine wave, there's something in your brain that allows you to kind of change it through your nervous system. So if it's all jaggedy and incoherent, just by concentrating on it, and actually you let go, that's how you do it. But you find a way to entrain a much better heart rate variability, and it's free and it's simple.
Breathing is a powerful tool.
That's true. Yes, most of the apps take you through a breath in and a breath out, and they do it quite evenly, and then you watch your HRV below that. So it's beautiful. I've got various apps. If anybody wants to contact me, and I'll send you the list.
Yeah.
of some of the ones I've used and trialed. They're just brilliant tools. Then there's sound healing. I've mentioned already binaural beats, or some people call it holosync. There are various other names for it, where you have a frequency difference in each ear. There's also a fabulous one called biofield tuning, which I've just discovered using tuning forks. You sort of bring the field, the incoherent blocks, a bit like yours, Rhino, you bring them in and you harmonize them back into the chakras. And
Right.
the woman who's developed that has mapped it. She's mapped different blocks in different parts, so very similar to your approach, I would say.
Yeah.
Sound baths, which if you've been to one, they're very interesting because they take you through a phased approach from beta through to alpha and delta and theta, and then back again, just by the use of gongs and bowls and various other bits and pieces. But they're incredible, and that again is all using entrainment. And then there's the modern idea, which is an electrical input. I've come across frequency specific microcurrent recently, which is really fascinating. Very, very low frequency stimulation of the skin through electrodes.
Yeah.
And certain frequencies seem to enhance certain things. So there's a whole sort of protocol around that. It's not so well known in the UK, but there are people doing it in the US, yeah. Europe, Australia.
I also do it. I started using it 1.5. I do it, yes. And fantastic. I really love it. Yeah,
it's nice. Really interesting, isn't it? I'm so interested because it's quite an old, well, it's sort of about 70, 80 years old, this technology, but then it was discontinued, I think, around the time when America decided they wanted to go for pharmaceutical medicine and get rid of anything that didn't fit that model, and they systematically destroyed people doing this kind of work. That's politics. We might touch on that at some point. The politics of medicine and health. So heart math, various apps. And then I sort of included anything else, and I'm sorry I've stuck you in the miscellaneous segment. You might think you're more in sound, or I don't know. But
we all have our different tools we like to use.
We all do. So kinesiology, I used it this morning, actually, my own body sway to just determine what I needed to take this morning. I find that so incredible that my body knows and can actually give me the information. And things like autonomic response testing, which uses a similar approach, and yours as well. So there are a vast array of many that I've missed out there, and apologies to anyone I have excluded, but it's obviously too many to say. So I'm coming to a stop now. In summary then, electrical phenomena permeate the body at a cellular level, especially your DNA, and your DNA is your code for life. So it's how your body develops and grows and ages, of course. So changing the information changes the way you age. The body is not just a thing, it's actually a process. It's an informational structure organized by this invisible quantum biofield of energy that involves all the organs and tissues of your body, but especially your heart and your brain. And it stores information and memory. And memory is such an important component of who we are, isn't it? What we remember, how we respond to things, who we want to become based on the people we've known and the kinds of information we've been given as we were growing. Water is intimately involved with this, and the quality of our water is really, really important. It's highly structured in living systems, and it translates the information. So issues in the biofield, whether through toxicity, fear, poor interactions, or light, living disconnected from the earth, for instance, lack of grounding, can create illness in the body, and usually do. And how that expresses is entirely unique to you, it's mental or physical. But it can be reversed and reprogrammed through these entrainment technologies and using the nature of a quantum process. So, and I think most therapists actually unconsciously use these quantum processes when they sit down with you and listen, because it's profoundly healing to be heard. So whether you see yourself as a biofield engineer or just, you know, you're doing what you do, you are actually changing people just by being present for them. Well, thank you for listening. That's my presentation.
Yeah.
Shall we, well, just to say, obviously, you can find me on Amazon, you can find me on Facebook, you can find me on my website. I have published 3 books so far. I'm on my 4th. It's a bit, once you've done one, you can't stop.
Yeah. So I think, Patricia, that was a fantastic summary of all the things you said. And if people would like to, we could do another session on each of the topics.
Yes, there's more to cover for sure.
There's a lot more to cover, and it was so interesting to listen to all these things.
Thank you.
And maybe we come back to a few of those when we give people some advices how to manage the time we are living in right now.
Yes, we could, couldn't we? Yeah.
This is related a lot. So we should probably now take a 15 minutes break.
Yes.
And then come back and talk a little bit more and receive the questions people may have.
Yeah, I think we're going to have 15 minutes for questions on my presentation. And then I should say people can type in now if you're listening on the premiere, and we will do our best to respond. We'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, it's hard to say because coronavirus is known for ages, and even if you buy all that disinfectors, it mentions the coronavirus, that it's effective against it. So it's always present. It seems that there is now a new version of it, mutation of it, and I think nobody really knows, is it more dangerous than others? And I've been trying to follow up what is published about things. And there are lots of controversial things which we could take into account and at the end come to the conclusion that the panic is pretty much media made for the purpose we don't know. People obviously die, but the statistics seem to say that there are not more deaths than normally.
Right.
And it is interesting. I remember the first case in one of the federal states in Germany, the first coronavirus death that was published was a 95-year-old man in a hospice who had esophagus cancer. Okay. And he was tested for coronavirus, and when he was dying, he was said to be the first coronavirus victim. Oh. So nobody knows, is it the virus that has caused the death, or is it something else? Yeah. And there are other microbiologists in Germany, doctors, who say there are 2,200 deaths every day in Germany at that at that age between 80 and 90, where you find most of them. And a few case of those is always where you can find a coronavirus.
Yeah. So I think,
So, but we will not in this situation. We are not able to find out something and who to blame for everything that's going on. Well, I think what we should do is be strong.
yeah,
Yeah, be careful, of course, and do what the government wants us to do at the moment, because it will have consequences for each of us if we don't follow the rules. So within those limitations, we should take care of ourselves. And this comes back to what you were talking about before. So at the moment, we have such a nice weather. So everyone who just could be outside, and even it's on the balcony, if you are not allowed to leave your home, or being in the garden, or just do some exercise outside, which is probably still allowed, I guess.
it is currently at the UK. You're allowed to go out once a day, I believe.
Yeah, and when the sun is shining, probably the best time, if you do a home office or something, probably the best time is the morning hours between 10 and 12.
Yeah.
Because this is when the sunlight has most of its daylight energy. Yeah. In terms of photons.
Okay, brilliant.
which we need.
We do.
And then in the evening, switch off light early.
Yeah.
Especially the energy saving lights, which have too much blue light.
Blue, yeah.
As well as computer screens or TV screens have.
Everything.
So that would give us a better sleep, because blue light in the evening just blocks melatonin production.
It does,
we just talked about it.
Yes.
And drink enough water.
Yeah, hydration.
If possible, get some heat, and everything that is heat is infrared light.
Infrared, yes, exactly.
So we can charge our water batteries, our cell batteries, and make energy. Perfect. And on the other hand, just try to stay connected with our families and friends, even if it's not possible on a personal level, but let's stay as connected through make phone calls very often or whatever. So this is basically good what the government says. We are social beings and we need the contact.
We do.
Because in isolation, people will die of that.
Yes, more than they will.
More than the virus would be the cause of any deaths, especially for the elder people.
Yes, I think that's true.
And the elder people, they already suffer in many places in the world of isolation.
I have to say, my own mother is living alone in sheltered accommodation with dementia right now.
Right.
And for her, it's business as usual, honestly. Yeah. She doesn't go out anyway, although she believes she does, and says to me, "Oh, I can't go out now." And I'm thinking, well, you haven't been out for a year, really. So, but for her, this is her normal life, and we have to sort of recognize that for the rest of us who are suddenly plunged into this situation of isolation, and oh my God, life has ended. This is how some of our elders live. If they're in homes, or like my mum, they're sort of being cared for at home. So I think it's the shock to the system. You talked a lot about shock last week, conflict shock. I think it's we're all in a state of high panic and shock, because everything that we knew and trusted has been shattered and dissolved in front of us. The things that we relied on to socially connect, going out to the pub, going out to football, films, cafes, bars, all of those things have been shut down. And yesterday also shops as well. So it is profoundly disorganizing to our sense of self when we have predicated our sense of self on who we are in our culture with respect to other people. I am a working person. I go out and I am a managing director, or I am a care worker, or whatever it is, and suddenly we're not able to perform.
Yeah. So I think this slowing down of everything should give many people the option to or the opportunity to think about themselves.
Yes, to reflect.
And reflect on what is really important in life. And
isn't it interesting?
Maybe we learn something from it.
Yeah, how we are coming to a state of newness, because this is such a profound change, that we can actually learn something from this to become more connected, actually more connected with ourselves, more connected with our earth, and more connected with each other. Even if we can't physically do that, we can learn to love them, because I did say, but love is a profoundly quantum phenomenon, so it can be communicated without being in contact with someone else.
That's totally true. Yes.
So
then we will also strengthen our immune system. You had it on your slide.
I did,
with all those good emotions like love and appreciation.
Appreciation,
So
gratitude.
Compassion is the same thing. I don't know if anyone had seen a video by Greg Braden, and he was talking about a very short meditation where people should touch their heart and align the frequencies of the heart and the brain with each other.
Perfect.
Touch the heart to focus on it, and then imagine emotions of appreciation, compassion, gratitude, and care.
Yes.
And this has a powerful effect, because it tells the brain that it is safe, because it seems that the brain is constantly scanning for danger.
Precisely.
And
Mine particularly.
And this is something that would tell the brain that it can be safe.
Yes.
And that would support regeneration as well, and then strengthen the immune system. And it's 3 minutes breathing.
Greg Braden,
I'm sure. In the heart. He calls it the Chante Ishta meditation, which he learned somewhere.
I'll see if I can find that, and I'll post it with this recording. Yeah, that would be great. I mean, this concept, what you've just raised, is so interesting. So the threat response in the brain is an autonomic, it links into our bodies, so it's not just in the head. It changes our digestion, it changes our breathing, it changes everything. And for some of us, through experiences in early life, adverse childhood experiences of perhaps being abandoned, not connected with parents, not looked after in the way we needed, we have a predisposition, therefore, that we have a high threat response, and the part of your brain which responds to that is your amygdala. And I know, I can't prove it, but I know that my amygdala is more responsive than most people's. I see threat everywhere. I get a warning light on the car and I go into deep stress. All right. There must be people out there who recognize this in themselves. Okay. So it happened on Sunday. Warning light, my body just goes into freeze very, very easily, because it's like, oh, do I need to stop the car? No, actually, it was just low tire pressure. It's not, and it's a tiny amount, it's gone down by one tiny amount. So it's not a problem, but my brain is wired to do that. And that is largely because of my childhood and what happened to me, and how these memories are frozen. So some of what's happening with the panic buying and the this response that a lot of us are going through is about childhood stuff. It may seem like it's all about now, but I think there's far more going on than we realize as individuals. And the response to that we need is connection with calm others, people who are transcending that in some way. So we need Boris Johnson to say, he's our Prime Minister, if you're watching from outside the UK, to say, let's do this together. We'll get through this in 3 or 4 months. Even if it's not true, we need to hear compassion, connection, and a sense of purpose and power. Because otherwise we will just flail around in panic and going out and filling our trolleys, even though it's putting us in danger, actually.
I would like to suggest that we even could probably shorten that time period
Yes.
And if we say we get through this in 4 weeks,
Yes.
and
Let's do that. Let's all intend that. Yeah.
because we make our immune system so strong,
yes,
and we are so strong that even if the virus is there, it doesn't make us sick.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's also something. You can find a virus in a person, and you may call the person infected, but do you develop symptoms or not? It's just another story. It depends on your immune system.
Of course it does. Yeah. And we're all variable. And that is why
And
the symptoms are varying as we're getting more data. Some people get gastric symptoms, other people get more pulmonary symptoms, and that's largely dependent on your own immune system and the amount of vitamin D in your system and so on. So that data is now coming out, and it is giving us more information and power as well, because we can change this. I do believe we can. So a great intention. I think, unless there's anything more you want to add to that, we can invite.
I was just thinking of something that you already started to say with connection to the earth.
Yes.
I wanted to add something about cycles. So there is the sun outside, which is at the heart of our solar system. So the field of the sun in which we live, it's just our, let's say, regional biggest cycle. Because the planets are owned by the sun, and we are owned by the sun, so we belong to the sun. And the next smaller cycle is the cycle of the earth. And we belong to the earth. We are part of it. We are owned by the earth, and by us being that highly conscious, we act as the eyes and the ears of the earth and the whole universe. So we are, as you said, we are so powerful with what we can create with our thoughts and emotions resulting from our thoughts and intention. So this is what we can use now.
And what we need to.
And the other thing is, what we also could do is in our homes reduce as much artificial electromagnetic radiation that we could, because that may disrupt us a little bit from being connected to the natural fields.
Yeah, I think to sit outside more, even if it's only on your balcony or in your garden or wherever.
That's something, or the other thing is, if people could switch off the Wi-Fi overnight, things like that, and turn the phone off for that, and don't have it on the bedside if you.
Yeah, definitely don't have it next to your sleeping position. A lot of people do sleep with their phones next to them. Move that away. Put it onto airplane mode overnight. You don't need to get texts at
these
night.
things.
They make a big difference. Also, clock radios, we call them plug-in time. Clock radios, terrible emitters of dirty electricity, and they're often right next to someone's head. Move it to the other side of the room. You can still read it, but it reduces the emissions a huge amount. I didn't go into EMFs. Perhaps it's another subject for another day.
But these are small things which we can do, and we might have more time to do that.
We are all going to have a lot more time to do things that we normally put off because we're too busy consuming, planning, doing. We can be more human beings right now than human doings, and I really would encourage people to do that. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this with me, Rainer, and I'm sure people will want to ask a few questions now. We're going to allow sort of 5 or 10 minutes for that. If we run out of time on the recording, you can always continue on the Inspirations Positive Living Group page. They've got a Facebook page, which I'll also post the link to. But for now, thank you very much, and good to have met you virtually, and one day hopefully we'll meet in person.
Hopefully not in such a far time.
No, exactly. Well, thank you again.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to mute myself and yourself and record for another 10 minutes for questions. Thanks everyone. do check us out, Positive Living Group Southampton, and also you've got our individual websites as well. Thank you.